Hello guys, welcome to the ninth game in the key squares concept, and now it's a French defense. The game is played between Smyslow playing white and Letelier black in Venice 1950. The game goes like e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, bishop b4, e5, c5, a3, bishop takes c3, bc3 and knight e7, a4, queen a5, queen d2, knight bc6, knight f3, cd4, and this is premature. Black should not exchange the queens while the bishop is still on the c1. The point is that from d2 the bishop prevents the useful knight c6, a5, c4 maneuver, which is an important resource for black. And here instead of cd4, here bishop d7, and after bishop d3 and f6 and bishop a3, and now cd4, cd4, queen takes d2 check, king takes d2, and knight a5 is a common line and a much better version for black. So after c takes d4, c takes d4, queen takes d2 and bishop takes d2, then knight f5, bishop c3. Perhaps some would say that the bishop on c3 is just a big pawn. This would be very far from the truth. With this last move, white liberated a perfect spot for his king on d2. After attacking or exchanging the f5 knight, white c3 bishop will once again be free and dominate on the a3 f8 diagonal. Here if white would have played c3, then black would have played knight a5. Bishop d7, bishop d3, rook c8, king d2, castles. Black would rather keep his king in the center, but after king e7, g4 and knight h6 and h3, there are problems with the h6 knight, and a5, and a very important move a5, fixing a target on b7 and preventing the move b6. Rook c7, rook h e1. Sooner or later black will move his pawn to f6 and king to f7. White's move overprotects the e5 pawn and indirectly attacks the e6 pawn. f6, bishop takes f5, e takes f5, e takes f6, rook takes f6. The position has settled. Instead of having the bishop pair and a space advantage, white enjoys better coordination due to his better bishop and the holes in the black camp. With his next move, white puts pressure on the b7 pawn and soon on the d5 pawn. Rook a b1 and h6, rook b5. Suddenly black faces problems. There is no satisfactory way to protect the d5 pawn. Bishop e6. The bishop is and after the bishop e6, the bishop is very passive there and requires protection. And rook e b1, rook f7, and excellent. Smyslow as usual puts emphasis on harmony between pieces. White's rooks need support and only the knight can help them. The knight can be placed on c5 but also on b4, e5 or f4. Knight e1. Knight e5 was obvious enough and a pretty good continuation. and if at all knight e5, then knight takes e5, d takes e5, d4, bishop takes d4, rook f d7, c3. White is probably winning, but it is difficult to find a concrete winning plan. Opposite colored bishops give some practical chances to black. White easily keeps the initiative with knights on the board. f4, and here a solid move. The bishop and rook get some space, and the white king can no longer use the f4 square. f3, stopping the f pawn. g5, knight d3, king h7, rook e1. Very nice. Black's king is now far away from the center and cannot easily cover all the infiltration squares on the e file. Rook f6, rook c5 with the dangerous threat of knight b4. Rook c8, and now knight b4. Tactics serve strategy. The same story can be seen over and over again. A player leads to a game in perfect strategical style, but then at some point strategy is no longer the way forward and tactics kick in. After knight takes b4, rook takes e6, rook takes e6, rook takes c8, knight c6, a6, undermining the c6 knight, and ba6, rook c7 check, king g6, and rook d7, knight e7, bishop b4. The previous moves were forced. Black loses the d5 pawn, and the two white central passed pawns will decide the game. Black's counterplay on the king side is not fast enough. Knight f5, rook takes d5, knight e3, rook d8, and then knight takes g2, d5, rook b6, bishop c5, and rook b7. If at all rook b5, then rook c8 followed by advancing the passed pawn. And after rook b7, rook c8, knight h4, king e2, knight f5, king c6, rook c6 check, king f5, king h5, if at all king f7, then king d3 comes, bringing the king into action, and then advancing the pawn. And then after king h5, d6, rook d7, rook c7. Black resigned here. By choosing his imprecise ninth move, Black ran into problems. Smyslow convincingly led the game and completely deserved the win. Okay guys, thank you all. I hope you would have enjoyed the game.